I sometimes think it's a pity religion got any further than love yourself as your neighbour. There is no other commandment greater than this, and just left it at that.
Well, it's preceded, if you remember, by love God with all your heart and all your mind and all your strength.
Well, I suppose in a way that is your neighbour. I don't know what I mean by that, but I think it. If those dogmatic bullies even loved Bunyan a smidge and had a care for his wife and family. Was there a family?
Yes, there was a family. His first wife had died, leaving him with 4 children. And the eldest of them, a girl, was blind.
Was blind?
He said she lay nearer to his heart than all the rest. He was tortured by the suffering he was bringing to them. Felt, he said, like a man pulling the house down on the heads of his wife and children.
His wife? He'd married again, had he?
Yes, he had married again. A girl of 16 called Elizabeth. The shock of his arrest sent her into premature labour, and the baby died.
Hello. Is there thunder around? It's as well to be prepared to have a stock of candles if a storm is crouching ready to spring.
Perhaps something's flown into the power line. Maybe an owl, could that be? Or a branch brushing against a wire?
We take it so much for granted, the light we see by.
And then something says it's not really like that. Don't count on it.
It's the dark, fighting to come back. I suppose it will win in the end.
Hey? What's going on?
More like, what's going off?
How's the candle power in this place, Tim?
Of course, Tim, the time man. We should have guessed.
There are plenty of candles where I was just now.
You've been dreaming, old man. Dreaming.
That's as may be. There are plenty of candles there, in the Swan, I think it was.
Hey-ho, that's it. The owl has landed.
I'll call the High Sheriff.
Theo?
It's dead.
So is he, I shouldn't wonder.
It's a very strange thing, friends, Tim mentioning the Swan. I'll tell you why. What was I telling you before the lights got nervous?
About Elizabeth, the girl Bunyan married.
That's it. And a gutsy girl she was. She travelled up to London for the first time in her life to present a petition to the Earl of Bedford asking for John's release. The case was postponed until the next assizes at Bedford. And there she was, bless her, making a last bid, when the judges were sitting at the Swan Hotel. What have you been dreaming, Tim, to make you mention the Swan?
Well, it's you who is saying I've been dreaming. And I suppose you feel quite sure that you're awake?
It's false. It's very false.
There are things to be said for and against. The facts of the matter can be very misleading.
You think so?
Everything is so very unlikely.
The indictment is false. I make bold to come to you again to know what will be done with my husband. They jailed him before there was any law forbidding the meetings. He only wishes to follow his calling and live in peace.
It's only a step, you see, between real and unreal. But how dreadfully reality gets punished for it.
I was with child when my husband was first apprehended, and the news of it so dismayed me I fell into labour. It lasted for 8 days until the baby was born, and the baby died.
What am I hearing? Is there something going on in the street?
Not a soul about. There's no lights in the houses.
There are plenty of candles alight in the Swan, but there was so much stir in the air, they danced and guttered. It was the crowding together of human breath. The candle wax ran down like tears.
I have 4 small stepchildren. One is blind. We have nothing to live on except what comes from my husband's work.
I can't get that Elizabeth girl out of my mind. What could she have been living on whilst he was in prison? There couldn't have been much put by. He was a tinker, you said.
Like his father before him.
And because he's a tinker and a poor man, he's despised and can't have justice.
There was a great puff of scorn from the sheriff, and the candle flames bowed so low to him that they threatened to leave us all in darkness.
And all because he was an unlicensed preacher.
Preaching according to what he called the small measure of light that God had given him. That set the judges snapping at his heels. For doing harm to his neighbours, they said.
No, my lord, it is not so. God has owned him and done much good by him.
They even said his preaching was the doctrine of the devil.
My lord, when the righteous judge shall appear, it will be known that his words are not the doctrine of the devil.
What a wild invention that is, making a Grimm's fairy tale character out of the necessary dark.
The necessary dark?
Well, isn't that what you said? To make the creative power, the two, there must be the contenders.
Bunyan believed Satan was real and gave us Apollyon.
Well, as a metaphor, yes.
And he got criticised at the time for dealing in metaphors. But they were metaphors for living truths. Despair was no less despair for appearing as a giant.
My lord, it is another 2 years before the next assize. What will become of us? And always the fearful thought in our hearts that he might be transported or put to death for knowing God as he feels he must. Always the fear of what will become of us. It's a hard thing to bear, my lord. A hard thing to bear.
And then all the candle flames gave up trying, and the darkness was too heavy to go on sleeping. If that's the way you see it.
And then the power failed and brought you back to us. For 12 years, more or less, they kept Bunyan in jail. And at last he came to the delectable heights of having written a bestseller, sold for 18 pence a copy. And there, like any mountain, it has stood secure, looking out over the human sea, for the past 300 years. There you are, Tim. You have the permission of the electricity board to go to sleep again.
Wherever time may take you. When you're a small child, a week's a terribly long time to wait for something. And when you're older, a century still speaks of history. But then I guess time gets its skates on. An old chap once told me, when you're 80, it's as if you're having breakfast every half an hour. At that rate, even 2,000 years must seem neighbourly.
Some trees can live that long, or not far off it.
Yes, the sequoia tree, and the oak tree, and the yew tree don't do too badly. When you were talking about the little Big Bang earlier, Adam, I thought about how the acorn does it. The sky going eruption of branch and leaf.
There's a wonderful passage by Mark Rutherford. I learnt it by heart once, the piece about the tree. I think I can still remember it. He said he was in a wood when something happened which was a transformation of himself and the world. It seemed to be no longer a tree away from him or apart from himself. The enclosing barriers of consciousness were removed, and the text came into his mind, thou in me and I in thee. The distinction of self and not self, he said, was an illusion. He could feel the rising sap, the fountain of life uprushing from the tree's roots. And the joy of the outbreak of the buds right up to the summit was his own. Whatever kept him separate from the tree, he felt was nothing.
Well done. Well remembered.
And thank you for remembering.
Well, friends, I suppose we'd better be making our way.
It was a good coming together.
How are your hands feeling?
My own again, I think they are.
So this time you'll be able to tell me which way we're going.
That could be. I'll take a chance on it.
Oh, are you hearing what I'm hearing? Listen.
The bells. Who in the world could be ringing the bells? Tim, do you know anything about this? Who on earth can be ringing those bells?
Well now, do I know? Who could be ringing the bells? The generations, it might be. It could be the generations ringing.